We are live. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joyce Manchester with the Joint Fiscal Office, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first meeting on behalf of the legislative members who have called this meeting. Our first order of business is to elect the co-chairs, and so I'm going to turn to Ellen to run the election of co-chairs.
So the legislation in Act 33 does state that the co-chairs of this working group shall be 2 members of the legislature, 1 member from the House and 1 member from the Senate. Are there any nominations? Senator Bray?
I would like to nominate Representative Sheldon.
Do you accept the nomination?
I accept the nomination.
Are there any other nominations?
Yes.
Senator Sheldon?
I nominate Senator Bray.
Do you accept?
I do.
So first, to vote, are there any other nominations? Seeing none, first to vote to elect Representative Amy Sheldon as one of the members as the co-chair. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and Representative Sheldon will be one of the co-chairs. Next for Senator Bray, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And all those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and Senator Bray is the other co-chair.
Congratulations, Mr. Co-Chair.
Yeah. It was very suspenseful. How that was. So we'll jump in with the welcomes, and it's a pleasure to be convening with all of you, and we're going to be working through today's agenda. Before we get too far, I just wanted to say that what for me about this group is that over the course of the summer, we've already had help from a lot of people in the background, and that includes Julia Richter at Joyce Manchester at JFO, as well as Sorsha Anderson, as well as the new co-chair, Amy Sheldon, as well as Alan Chakowski. So people have been meeting, preparing groundwork for today since June. So I want to I'll just say I really appreciate that work.
You want to walk through the agenda? Have folks had a chance to look at the agenda? And so I'll just touch on the items, and then if you have, I guess at the end, if you have ideas for questions, bring those up. But we're going to do the overview. First, we're going to do introductions, actually. And we have Jen Nauer with us, who's our facilitator. And that's one of the things that's a little bit different about this process, particularly, we're co-chairs, so that's new for us. And also having a professional facilitator. We're super excited about having you join the group. Thank you for taking the challenge. And so we're going to be kind of finding our way a little bit today in terms of our roles. So here we are with the agenda that we've worked on together, and figuring out where we're all going to plug in, basically. So you'll probably experience a little bit of that. But essentially, we'll do introductions. We're going to do an overview of res reform, and Ellen will help us out with that, how we got here, why we're doing it now, take a break. And then what are the objectives of this group, which I know many of you helped formulate the objectives of the group, and I think it's going to be pretty clear, but I think getting us all on the same page and helping the public understand the process and where we are is really important to what we're doing. Take another break. It's a 3.5-hour meeting, so we're going to try to keep it civilized and acknowledge our humanity, and keep going with our overviews, and do a wrap. We will have an opportunity for public comment at the nearing the end, not at the end, at 11:35-ish. So there will be a chance at every one of these meetings for the public to comment, and then we'll do the next steps. Does anyone have questions or concerns about the agenda at this point. Anything big we're missing?
But I wanted to say just one thing about I've been participating in the last 6 weeks on another working group. And although we know that the work product of this working group, a report, will go forward to the legislature in January to help inform and sort of jumpstart that work. One of the things that's a little frustrating, no matter how hard you try in committee time to hear from everyone, you have to hear from them in sequence. And it's very hard to have a real discussion amongst all stakeholders. And what I've really come to appreciate in the other working group I'm on is how often everyone at the table is involved in a discussion. And it's a chance for stakeholders to have much more back and forth in the committee process. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussions of this group. You're a really a literal expert group and really appreciate the fact that you're willing to come and participate and help out these discussions to get us ready for next session.
Actually, a couple logistical things that I'm just remembering are that the meetings are going to be recorded, and functionally those records, the recordings will be our minutes. And we have Sorsha Anderson with us, helping us as our staff person. So she'll be helping us to post those in a timely manner after we wrap up, so that if you miss a meeting, you can go back and watch it. And then also members of the public can access it. And do you have questions? Just kind of keep checking in with you. Just maybe raise your hands if you do. I know. All right, with that, let's go to our introduction. So
I have one more observation to make. This is going to be one of those funny things about working with a facilitator. There are, in the course of today's meeting, a couple of little exercises and activities built in so that it's not all open discussion. That, for me, is a really good way to see what works for you and what doesn't. I think to the point you just made, this is an opportunity for a lot of exchanges in a way that might be different than what you've been able to do when you're in session or another process. It's a bit of an experiment for me as well as for you, and certainly for the co-chairs. So you can expect a couple of activities today, like an interactive poll that we'll try, for example. So open mind, feedback always welcome once we try those things out and see what works and see what doesn't. And for folks online, my eye is attentive to you too, as well as in the room. So if you find that you need to catch my attention, you can see me on the screen here, but you can always raise your hand. You have your voice and your microphone to catch our attention. And I'll be doing my best to toggle that back and forth from the room and top of mind. Thanks for your patience with a hybrid environment. It's nice to see so many people here. The last thing to anticipate is that you will have a couple of folks coming and going from the meeting for their availability. And you'll also have a couple of guests that you'll hear from today around the data that's going to be surrounding this work. So they'll be here too at around 10 o'clock. So you can ask questions and figure out what the timeline of that modeling will be. I think that's all the logistics. We may have forgotten some, but that's probably enough to start with. Folks online, any questions from what you've heard so far? Good to go. In the room? Introductions.
yeah. Lewis, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to start with introductions. If you could just, your name and your organization would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Sheldon. Lewis Porter, Washington Electric Co-op, General Manager. Thanks.
Ken Nolan, General Manager, Vermont Public Power Supply Authority.
And Julie Walsh, Climate and Energy Program Director with DPERC.
Candace Morgan, Director of Corporate Affairs at Green Mountain Power.
Spray, Addison Senate District, Chair Natural Resources and Energy.
Amy Sheldon, Middlebury, State Representative from Middlebury, which is Addison 1, and Chair of the House Environment and Energy Committee.
Jennifer Nauer, Facilitator.
Brian Shoup, the Executive Director of the Vermont Natural Resources Council.
Peter Sterling, Executive Director of Renewable Energy Vermont.
Rebecca Town, CEO, Vermont Electric Co.
Jeffrey Graham, Senior Manager, Global Partners.
Now with online introductions, you can't see where you're sitting in relation around the table. So we might, you can call people out if you like, or you can.
Maybe folks could raise their hands. Is everyone on the screen a member of the steering committee? Yeah.
As far as I can tell you. Go ahead, Christopher.
Hi, Chris Pearson, former 8th-term I did 8 terms in the legislature and I'm glad to be here on behalf of the Sierra Club.
All right. Senator Watson.
Hello, Senator Ann Watson, representing the Washington District.
Darren.
Hi, good morning. Darren Springer with Burlington Electric Department, and I'm joined by my colleague Amber Whitmayer, who will step in when I have to leave a little bit early. Thanks.
Aaron, we're having a little hard time with your sound. I don't know if there's something you could do on your end to make it more clear.
If there's a colleague coming in to take your place, Darren, at some point, could you just repeat that name or put it in the chat for me?
It's Amber and she's on.
Amber, okay, great. Amber, maybe you can go next if you're there.
Yeah, there's Amber.
Good morning. Amber Whitmere, Burlington Electric Department.
Bill Driscoll.
Yeah, Bill Driscoll with Associated Industries of Vermont.
Laura, I think you're unmuted.
Laura Sibilia, Vice Chair, Environment and Energy Committee in the House, representing Wyndham 2.
Others want to unmute and then we can have you introduce?
If you're part of the working committee.
Oh yeah, if you're part of the working group.
Good morning. This is Shayna Loisel with Velco and manager of the Vermont System Planning Committee. Thank you. Glad to be here this morning.
I'll go next. Mia Watson, Special Programs Manager at Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Thanks.
Good morning, Chase Whiting. I'm an attorney with Conservation Law Foundation on the Clean Energy and Climate Change team.
All right, did we get everyone? All right, great. Thank you, everyone. We're going to turn this over to Jen.
Thank you. That's, you know what I was puzzling over is because there are sometimes people standing in for official working members, that's not always as obvious to me unless you tell me. So I think we've got everyone. It's any official working member on the screen we haven't heard from or standing in for an official working group member. No. Okay, good.
So Claire McIlvaney's here.
Hi, Claire.
And although the Department of Public Service isn't formally on the group, they're going to be joining us later. And TJ4. And Claire is, I think, keeping an eye on participating and keeping an eye on things. And TJ will be coming in later.
So we'll hear a little bit more from the Department of Public Service and from the BRAL group, which are 2 groups having some of that modeling data to bring to the working group at 10 o'clock. So Claire, you'll have a chance then to say a little bit more about the work that's available if TJ's not here. Okay. Well, the hardest part of the meeting is now over, the logistics and settling in. So now to the big picture overview of this working group. Alan, I think we'll start with you. It's a really high level overview and just some foundational work of how this group came to be. Anything that you need to share on the screen?
I don't think so. So I didn't introduce myself before, but I'm Ellen Tchaikovsky. I am the Legislative Council Attorney who staffs energy issues. And I'm going to briefly go over the language from Act 33 of this past session that established this working group. Also, we haven't mentioned the name of this working group, so just as a reminder, this is the Legislative Working Group on Renewable Energy Standard Reform. It was created by Section 10A of Act 33. It is posted today on this working group's website if anyone wants to look at it. It starts at the bottom of page 11, and I'm going to just do a overview of what it includes. So the Legislative Working Group on Renewable Energy Standard Reform is created to draft legislation to be considered by the General Assembly in the next legislative session. So the membership of the working group, you just heard who all the members are, and you are members of it. So it includes 4 legislative members, 2 from the House appointed by the Speaker of the House, 2 from the Senate appointed by the Committee on Committees, and 2 of those members are the co-chairs. There are also 14 other members who represent different interests related to the renewable energy standard. You just heard that a lot of the electric utilities, as well as some other interest groups are included in that membership. There are 2 optional members who I don't believe have appointed representatives to this group. So then the big part of this working group are what are included in its duties. So in addition to submitting draft legislation, the working group shall report on the following 8 issues. So 1, whether any changes to Vermont's existing renewable energy requirements or other energy policies are needed to increase grid stability, resiliency, modernization, and reliability. 2, identifying any barriers to moving to a 100% renewable standard for all electric utilities by 2030. 3, recommending cost-effective procurement policies to increase new renewable energy storage and flexible load management to offset increasing in-state load, improve grid stability and resiliency, and that consider integrated resource planning electric load growth projections. 4, whether increasing the requirement for out-of-state renewable procurement within or delivered into the ISO New England territory can ensure affordable electric rates. 5, evaluating the impact legislative recommendations may have on Tier 3 requirements. 6, evaluating the impact recommended legislative changes to procurement programs will have on Vermont jobs and the Vermont economy. 7, how current programs impact environmental justice focused populations, households with low income, and households with moderate income, and how a revised renewable energy standard can ensure that benefits and burdens are distributed equitably. So I'll pause there quickly and just note that environmental justice focused populations is a defined term in Title III and was part of the environmental justice legislation that was passed a couple of years ago. And so that is a defined term. And then number 8, how any changes to the renewable energy standard will address the equity of distribution of benefits of renewables between residential properties. So the last couple of pieces of the legislation, the working group shall have the legal assistance of the Office of Legislative Counsel, that's me, and administrative assistance from the Office of Legislative Operation, so that's Sorsha Anderson, who will be the committee assistant. And then the Joint Fiscal Office may retain the services of 1 or more independent consultants. And so that is Jen Nauer for the facilitation and mediation services. And then you'll also hear about the data analysis consultant, the Brattle Group, and what they'll be doing. The Department of Public Service shall be invited to advise the working group on their ongoing public process related to the renewable energy standard and any other items. And then compensation, legislative members are entitled to per diem, and then other members of the working group not compensated by their employer are entitled to per diem. And then finally, the working group shall submit draft legislation and report on its deliberations and findings to the House Committee on Environment and Energy and the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy by December 1, 2023. Working group members may submit minority reports that shall be included with the report containing the draft legislation. So I'm sure you will hear much more about the individual duties that you'll be working through as part of this group.
Questions? Coaches, comments, or reflections?
I have to say good morning to Representative Sedalia.
Welcome.
My apologies.
From online to in the room. So there is an awful lot of territory in that group of that list of objectives. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the morning, including looking at a timeline for some of them. I do want to emphasize that this is an opportunity to really learn more as new data and modeling becomes available. And it'll be interesting to see the timeline for when that is available. I think you're looking at October and November. There's still an awful lot of work that can be done. One thing I'd like to do to warm us up a little bit, and this is one of those activities to give a try that you may not have tried before, is to use an interactive poll. So those of you who are online, it's that the link to that poll is actually in your email. Sorsha would have sent it yesterday. And those of you who are in the room, there's a brightly colored index card in front of you. You can use a QR code or use a tablet or your laptop to log into that URL. This is a Mentimeter poll. It means that your input is going to show up in real time in an aggregate and anonymous format. Won't be able to advance the questions until I do, so probably what you're seeing is just a title page that has the name in it right now. I'm going to share my screen so that everybody can see that.
Would it?
Are you running into any technical questions online? Go ahead.
Not a technical question, Jennifer, but I don't know if anyone else cares, but you're brand new to me, and I'd be curious to understand if you have just a little tiny bit about your experience and just so that I kind of know who I'm listening to.
Yeah, you'll hear much more at 10 o'clock. All of us who are just joining this committee will be able to speak, and you can ask us questions about our role, what we're available for, et cetera.
Okay.
I'll step into that group right then. So for the Renewable Energy Standard Reform Working Group, it's probably that first page that you're seeing. For the moment, my role is to help facilitate this exercise and to help this open discussion get started. So let's just advance to the next slide. It looks like most of you are here on the poll. There's not any technical questions. We'll go to the next question. It's just a warm up to see again how many people are on the poll and if it's working for you. When was the last time you were in this legislative meeting space, whether in person or via virtual link? Select the one that best fits and press submit. And then you can see on the screen those results are starting to pop in real time. There you go. Again, observations, you've had a little break from this room, especially those of you who are working in the legislature all the time. You feel like you never left.
My observation is the last time I was a chair in this room, it was all the same paintings of men, and I asked for a woman, and they're all still men.
Okay. Well, here's what I also understand is that you've spent different amounts of time in this room, but some of you also spend time with each other outside this room. And so you have conversations that are outside of this meeting series. That makes all the sense in the world. It's also possible that sometimes when you're in this room, it's a different kind of process. It's a little bit more scripted. And so again, inviting you to a space where there will be a little bit more of an exchange than maybe it's been in the past. It looks like 18 of you were able to participate here. That's a great number. So I'm going to go on to the next question, which is really a part of this discussion. What extent do you think the renewable energy standards are ripe for revision at this moment? 1 being not at all, to 5 being extremely ripe. You can see those results come in real time on the screen. The objective for this question is it gives us a place to start the conversation and learn what's top of mind for you. It also gives me a little bit of information about how this kind of tool might work for the group. Everyone's answers are in, and at this point, some open discussion would be welcome to understand what's top of mind. I'm going to get off the screen in just a moment so we can see those of you calling in via Zoom. Here's my question to you. Why or why not? What informed your answer? It looks like a lot of you are sort of in middling ground there in terms of whether this is right for revision. What informed your 1 through 5? Anyone may answer. You can raise your hand and we'll just see what's top of mind. We have a couple minutes to linger here. Go ahead.
I'll be not shy. The thing that I think amongst them, well, one thing is the RES and the charge to the working group is pretty comprehensive. There's 8 deliverables. There's a huge range of territory to work in. But one of the most compelling things to me is moving the RES to 100% renewable by 2030. I think because we're electrifying, and we would like to do it in an equitable way, as best I know still, the only way to assure that every Vermonter has access to clean renewable power is to have the grid supply clean renewable power to every customer. Some people have been able to go ahead and do things at home or at their business on their own, and that it's great, all these pioneers who have pushed us along. I also feel like for filling in for everyone else, the social equity side of things, and keeping us all together as moving as a state, and that's for me the most compelling.
You are somewhere along the
5+.
How about others? Anyone online? What informed your answer? Senator Watson, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was also 5. And the reason was because, well, so I have a few reasons. One is financial. The fact that we have the potential for a lot of influx of money from the Inflation Reduction Act, that's a huge reason, I think, to take advantage right now and help have the federal government help us transition towards more renewable sources of electricity. A second reason is that just the urgency of climate change. I mean, we all experienced, or a lot of us experienced firsthand the flooding this summer, and that this is increasingly in our faces, and we really need to act, and it means that we need to clean up our grid. It means that we need more. We need to incentivize more renewables in our electric supply, and then. For other reasons, yesterday I was actually on the Energy Information Agency's website and was reading that Vermont receives Vermont produces less than half of its electric need in state. And, so even just from the perspective of resiliency, we need to be producing more renewables in state. So those are some of the reasons why I'm pretty interested in this reform process. So thanks.
Did you have?
Sure. Ken Nolan. I was a 3, actually. Just for background, I've been managing utility power portfolio since 1990. I made the transition with ISO New England. I was the leader of Burlington's supply group that made them 100% renewable. So I've been doing this for a while, and I understand the constraints and issues you run into. And I do think that moving to 100% renewable is where we ought to be going. But I'm concerned, and what I saw in the legislative discussion last spring and fall was really such a broad scope, and a feeling that you really needed to almost put the thumb on the utilities to move forward and be very prescriptive. My concern with this conversation is that it can become very broad and not really focused on the overarching goal of climate change and moving to 100% renewable. So I'm hoping that we can keep the conversation focused on what we're really trying to achieve and not get into conversations that are more helpful to individual stakeholders here.
Okay, so I was a 4, and in the face of increasing extreme weather, the need to electrify, and the actions we've been taking to increase beneficial electrification, and for Vermonters at home, we really need to have a dynamic and flexible grid and power supply. I think we have a lot of innovative actors in this space sitting at this table. For me, the most important aspects of this work are thinking about those Vermonters at home and the rates in balance with this beneficial electrification, the resilience of the grid, and also new renewables. And so I'm excited to do this work. I think that we all have a lot to contribute here, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we end up.
Rebecca Town, and for Vermont Electric Co-op, and I was also a 3. I think sometimes we forget in these conversations that our renewable energy work so far has been incredibly successful. And so, you know, the electric supply in Vermont and the work of a lot of folks in this room has created a very clean energy supply. So I was a 3 because I do think there is room for improvement, but I also think that we have displayed a lot of leadership, and I think that some of the work we're doing is around the edges versus some of the core of what we've sort of hit the core, accomplished the core, and now it's about how do you improve. So that is one piece that's important. There is also some affordability concerns, so very pleased that that is a big piece of what we'll be considering. And also a lot of our current renewable energy standards do not consider reliability. And particularly as we think about intermittent renewables, that's a worry. And so I also am really glad that that's part of this conversation. I think that's a really important piece.
I'm going to pause for a minute and just see if anyone's online, then we'll come back to the room. Is there anyone online waiting to speak? Okay, go ahead.
Jeff Crim with Global Foundries. Obviously, we're a little new to this space. So I was as a 3 as we're learning a little bit more about the playing field here. Well, the observation that we've made so far is that the utilities across the state approach their compliance with the res differently. There's some uniqueness from utility to utility. And what I would leverage is while we're looking to reduce emissions across the state, is that we leverage the uniqueness of each of the utilities and the solution that we put forward in how to reduce the emissions and approach to climate change.
Other thoughts? What informed answer? Yes.
Briefly, there's a lot of reasons to do this, to update the renewable energy standard, but I just would say 2 to the why now question. And this is echoing one thing that has already been said, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. That, the clock is ticking on that. That's money that's available now and goes away in the early 2030s. So if we do this, now is the time in my mind. The other thing is just it's been almost a decade since the last time this law was, passed. It hasn't really been modified since then. And a whole heck of a lot's changed in the world of energy, to say nothing of climate, in that 8-9 years. So that also feels like a reason that digging into this now is time is right.
To echo what others have said, but I do think it's important. The passage of the Inflation Reduction Act has given us an incredible opportunity, as Senator Watson said, to bring in federal money to help us make a transition. And the nature of renewable energy has changed so much since the original res was written. The prices have come down with the decline. So I think that does speak to why we want to rethink how to do some things. Also, we're the only state in New England that has not updated its RPS, our renewable energy standard, since ours was enacted in 2017. So every other state hasn't changed with the times. We're the only state in New England in our region that hasn't. So those 3 issues, those 3 pieces seem like good reasons to move forward.
Go ahead, Chris.
Just echoing a lot of what's been said, but in addition to being a standout around New England for not having made adjustments, our current res is also a little cute. We acknowledge so-called renewable energy in a way that other states do not. They have not allowed large hydro as a clear example. So, I think these really should be ongoing iterative process, and we have a great opportunity to kind of hit this North Star 100% renewable, do it thoughtfully, as people have discussed, but it is beyond time to do that, in my opinion.
anyone else sitting on a comment?
She's behind the line.
Oh, Chase, I didn't see your right. So your hand, the raised hand is behind. There's a live button on the screen, but please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little backlit here. I will largely echo what I heard said by Representative Sibilia, by Ben, by Peter, and by Chris. So I won't belabor these points, but why now? Because climate change is happening, because extreme weather events are happening, because they are occurring in Vermont, and because they are putting great pressures on our electricity generation and distribution systems, making the need for resilience greater than it has ever been. And so the types of reforms that we're contemplating, we know can help improve resilience. We've seen it occur in different parts of the country and the world with distributed new renewables being put close to the sources where they're being used. So it's an important topic to look at. Why now? Because costs have come down. Supply chains have matured, industries have matured, new federal policies like the IRA and others before it have created important new revenue streams and tax incentives. And so it's more financially feasible now than it ever has been. Also, as Peter and Chris alluded to, Vermont is falling behind in the region when it comes to its renewable energy standard. There is a lot of work that we can do to help Vermonters get clean, affordable, and resilient electricity. Other states are doing it in this region, and we can take note of the progress that they are making. And finally, why now? Because simply we are running out of time. Climate change is here. It is only going to get worse. We need to do our part to reduce climate warming emissions. And this is one of the most fundamental ways that we can do so, because the type of electrification we're going to need to see in the transportation sector, in the home heating sector, is going to rely upon clean electricity from the folks in this room, from the electricity sector. It's the linchpin that is going to put all of the other solutions that we have into an actual frame of working. And so I'm very excited this group is meeting, and I'm really excited to tackle these issues with you all. Thank you.
Are others sitting on a comment or reflection? So I'll turn now to the co-chairs and the legislative group as you're thinking about this. It's a legislative working group after all, and sort of the way that this group might be different than other legislative working groups. Are there any observations or thoughts you have around what your hopes are for this passage of 7 more meetings after today? Because it's a lot of work, a lot of ground to cover.
Can you restate the question?
Yeah, it's an imprecise question. It's more about what your hopes and expectations are for this time, and if there's any reflections after, especially after hearing some of these open comments, around how this time get used or what you're hoping to see. Yeah.
But, so one thing, we have had in the General Assembly more than one RES reform bill in the last. There's been at least 5 years running a bill, and we haven't, and it's run aground over issues, different sort of worldviews, competing interests, and we've heard them expressed as people talk today. And so I think what is really helpful, and I'm glad that you're here as a facilitator, is that I feel like we've had stakeholder groups that, because of the nature of the committee process, where I'm saying you end up with conversations in a sequence as opposed to an exchange amongst all the stakeholders at the same time. It's very hard to sort things out when it's testimony stretched over 3 weeks. Now we have a chance to have a real-time conversation as a group, and I think everyone has legitimate and different points of view, and I'd say if I had to sort of put things into camps, I'd say the utilities have requirements and on them to do certain things. There's, I'd say, a more environmental and renewable energy camp that wants to see us make more progress in the space. And then there's been a third player that's not formally a regular committee member, and that's the Department of Public Service that speaks generally, we'd say, for consumers or something like that. And I know that they're going to be joining the conversation sort of in a side saddle or something, I don't know. But, you know, it's like those three stakeholders and having a conversation amongst each other. It's a smart, well-intentioned, thoughtful group, and I just feel like we haven't really had a good forum to have the conversation before. So that's what I think is a unique opportunity from my point of view, having watched us wrestle with this for 5 years and not make the kind of progress I think many people would like to make.
I guess things that I heard in that going around, I think that I'd like to keep front of mind as we dive into the areas that I think that we'll go through the 8 topics and get to the heart of the matter pretty quickly on what are the specific things that Ken mentioned, like where, like keep the long view in mind is what I heard you say, but also we need to be specific. And, you know, Jen, you're here to help us with those tension points that are real. So I hope we can make the most of our time by identifying them quickly and just working through them. And then I also really appreciated hearing, you know, that I think we all share this goal and that we have, all of us have unique perspectives, but certainly the diversity among our utilities is perhaps unique in the country. I'm new to this world, but it seems like it is to me, and we should make the most of that. So I appreciated that comment very much as well. And then I'm excited to get into the heart of it and identify those things that, the sticking points.
Our co-chairs.
Is Senator Watson still on the line? Yeah. Does that mean that do you have something to add? Or?
I would just add, I think that there is not a person at this table who doesn't have something about the current renewable energy standard or the factors running that contribute to it that they would like to see changed, improved, modified, removed, something. So I think there is something everyone can bring to the table and we can sort through it. I'll just echo Chair Shelton's comment. I hope we get to those tension points quickly. It's not an accident that you are here, and that mediation is a term that appeared in the legislation. So,
Senator Watson.
Oh no, I didn't have anything, but since you gave me the floor, I do want to just note, just as a matter of logistics, and so everybody knows, I will need to duck out at about 9:40, and so, you know, for conversations moving forward, I will be watching asynchronously the remainder of the meeting and hope to be providing feedback in whatever ways I can on issues that come up. But I'm also hoping that while I'm able to be here for the first part of the meeting, that I can contribute to some meaningful discussions during that time.
So, did you have something else to say?
I was just thinking, like, if we're ahead, we should skip ahead.
And we might get there in just a moment. Yep, go ahead.
You know, resiliency is a term that's come up in a number of people's comments, and it's been a term we're using a lot. I was talking to someone who works in the energy space in the last couple of weeks, and they said, we were talking about resiliency, and he said, well, the most important thing for resiliency I know of is not locating your electrical panel in the basement. And we're talking about with flooding, you know, so there's going to be like real world intrusions, and like the RES is a sort of a high level policy thing, and then we have people right here in town struggling with devastating flooding, and for them resilience is related to power supply is a very different thing. So.
Well, so here's the reflection from the facilitator seat, and it's that revisions, the conditions for revisions are getting pressure from lots of different areas. Both the pressure and the things that make revisions work are relying on circumstances that are surrounding them, the systems that are surrounding them, the people that are in the conversation. So you don't have to in order to look at those revisions and scrutinize them and make them work for you, it doesn't always mean that you have to agree on all of them. Recognizing that at least coming to the table to explore and understand first and analyze, and then start figuring out where you stand as a party. That's part of what this process is going to be about. And mediation as a forum can take lots of different shapes. This one is unique because it's very public, and there are many people outside of this table that still have much to say and have a stake in the game. And so I think it'll be easier now that co-chairs are elected and we're getting this process started to figure out how that public comment comes in to inform and surround and support to the conversations that are happening here. So this will probably go to an earlier question that Christopher brought up, which is, what is your role as a facilitator mediator? We will talk about that at 10 o'clock, but we are a bit ahead of schedule, so some of our guests aren't here yet. And that means that we've got a decision to make. I'm going to look to the co-chairs for guidance on this one. There's more work we can do around 1 through 8 and kind of figuring out what they mean. It might feel a little premature to not have heard from our guests and what they're available for, the Brattle Group and Department of Public Service. They'll be here at 10. So this group can still field questions they might have of me as an outside resource. If you want to take a look at options 1 through 8, do you have a feeling about where you want to go?
Jump in. Sure. I think we could jump in.
So here's what jumping in means. It means looking at that list of 1 through 8 that's listed in the legislation, the different tasks that this work group is looking at. And because that conversation could go far and wide, the first question that I have for you is, which of those options? Is there something to say? Is there someone trying to say something online? It's to see which of those items are data dependent. You have some microeconomics data that will be coming to this group from the Brattle Group that will be available in November. And I know the Department of Public Service has several different scenarios that will be available shortly. There's a public engagement process happening now, I believe. So, yes, question?
Yeah, you mentioned that we're getting data from the Brattle Group in November.
Who are they? What are they giving? Is that?
Who gave them questions to answer? Or how did that data come about? Or who asked them to do what? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so that's a fabulous question that I'm not the right person to answer it because I'd give you an approximate and other people would need to correct me. And the Brattle Group will be here at 10 in order to talk about the work that they're doing and how it's informed. My understanding is it's a microeconomics study of impacts of different scenario planning of revisions, or help me out.
I'll just ask them.
Well, no, you can also ask the group. There might be somebody here who could answer, especially the JFO office potentially could, but go ahead, Senator Bright.
Well, so it's a great question, and you're only going to get data. Depending on how you ask the questions, you get different data. So what's interesting for us as a working group is that the Department of Public Services had a public forum going on. I would describe it, and they'll speak for themselves later, but I would describe it as something along the lines of, you as Vermonters, what's important to you in your energy supply? And they've been having this public process and identifying, getting feedback. We'll hear more about when we're going to hear what they're learning. But within that work, they've identified, I think, 6 scenarios that have come out of, are being driven by public perceptions around what's important to Vermonters around energy. And those scenarios are going to be inputs to what the Brattle Group takes as scenarios for doing economic analysis on. So
economic analysis in terms of impacts on.
Right, microeconomic impacts. and I don't want to describe it as an entirely like lockstep thing. We'll see those scenarios but they're information from that public process that the department's going to feed over to our group so that we can, my hope is that in the end, we have the best of both worlds. We'll have had this input from a public process, joining the work of this committee, and then we have the Brattle Group as analysts doing economic impact analysis on behalf of the group.
Is that clear as mud? Clear as mud?
Yeah.
Questions?
I'm just curious how the scenarios will be developed by the department.
So, they're going to be here.
They'll be here at 10.
Jade's coming and Claire McElhaney's with us now, but on the agenda for today. So I was just trying to say at a very high level what they're doing, public process scenarios, they become an input to this committee and our economic impact analysis. And I think, the question I'm hearing in there is, do we want to just take the scenarios as offered, or is there a chance to discuss, evaluate, modify, et cetera?
Building on Brian's comment, I think we heard a couple of times trying to use the uniqueness of the utilities in the design. And I represent municipals, right? So they would tell you that their power portfolio is based on the desires of their residents and customers. So they're already factoring in the public perception and decisions they make. But I would point on the economic analysis the Brattle Group's doing, you get a much different outcome if you ignore the decisions utilities have made to this point and just say, I'm going to build a portfolio from scratch, versus if that analysis includes decisions that have already been made. I know in our case, we're 80 to 90% contracted out for the next 7 or 8 years. So changes wouldn't really have a negative financial impact potentially, but it would be very difficult to make a positive financial impact. So I just want to make sure that when the Brattle Group is doing their work, they're actually including the utilities' existing positions as part of that analysis.
These are great questions. They're really well timed for when you've got the people in the room to speculate and sort of that their ears are on it and they can answer in real time. They're all good observations, and I understand the intensity in asking and feel inept to answer because you're going to want to talk to the people who are doing that work.
Can you follow up a little bit about how your utilities are already reflecting their customers' desires?
Sure. So we're a joint action agency. We work with 11 municipal utilities. Those municipal utilities are governed by the elected or appointed bodies, the select board, in most cases, the village trustees. When we make power supply decisions, each utility has to agree or disagree with that purchase. So the elected officials of the community are the ones who are telling us what power to buy, whether they want to invest in hydro, biomass, wind, solar. I mean, we're guided by the renewable energy standard kind of guardrails, but within that community is deciding what they think the important supply structure is.
And also based on what's available.
What's available throughout New England. So we look at all the different supply opportunities. Since I got the floor, I would also comment, I heard a couple of times that prices have come down for renewables. I'm actually leaving this meeting to enter a negotiation for a PPA for solar and battery. And we're not on the ground as purchasers, we're not actually seeing prices come down that much versus what we've seen in previous years. So I'll be very curious to see that data come forward over time.
So building off of Ken and Chair Shelton's comments, I think it would be really important and instructive for us to have an understanding of what is happening with our utilities right now in terms of rates, in terms of projects that they're undergoing, in terms of the associated policies that come with this. So net metering, standard offer, other policies that are associated with this. For me, I envision that as kind of a comparison chart, just so that we are grounded in what's really happening here and are able to, when we think about rates, again, which are important to me to think about, as well as adding renewables and resilience, understanding where rates are now, where the utilities are now in terms of their projects, resilience projects and renewables, and what factors are affecting their rates, again, like net metering, et cetera. So I don't know if anybody could clean that up a little bit in terms of data points that would be helpful looking at the utilities, but I feel like that basis is really important for us to have.
Is that data already available?
Probably, I'm sure they all have it.
Sure, by utility, and probably aggregated by the department. Yeah.
Aggregated by the Department
By the department, yep.
of Public Service? Yep.
And Senator Watson.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So just a question about the Brattle Group's data. So, and Senator Bray, you brought this up, the question about like, is there flexibility? So I guess my question, and maybe this is a question for the Brattle Group, but maybe you know this already, so I'm curious if this is already a known thing. With those scenarios, is the Brattle Group already sort of locked into that, and that's definitely what they're doing? Or, is there space for them to be more responsive to what this group comes up with? I guess I'm thinking about like, I'm hoping that they'll be able to, analyze the impacts of on jobs and the economy, et cetera, from the discussion that this group has. So I'm curious if if they're already locked into this or if there is flexibility.
Scenarios are on the DPS side.
Yeah.
And then the Brattle Group is working for us on, I think, more what Ann's talking about. Senator Woodson.
That's a great question for them to clarify. Yeah, your question is, do they have the flexibility to be researching and working with questions other than those 6 scenarios?
Right.
Yeah. It's a good question to ask.
Okay. And I may not be here. So.
They will be here, but not when you're here, but it will be a summary note of sorts. Yes. Joyce, do you have a clarification on that?
Yes, Joyce Manchester with the Joint Fiscal Office. So we actually issued the RFP, the request for proposals, and it is in the RFP and in the contract that we have with the Brattle Group that the legislative members of this group can ask for additional variables to be looked at as part of the macroeconomic analysis that the Brattle Group will do. So the sequence of events is that there will be 6 scenarios defined by the stakeholders advisory group with the Public Service Department. And then those 6 scenarios will be evaluated by the Public Service Department contractor, which is SEA. They will be looking at all the micro aspects, so prices of different kinds of electricity coming from different sources and so forth. So that's all the micro analysis happening over at Public Service Department. And then those outputs will become the inputs for the work that will be done by the Brattle Group to look at the effect on the economy and jobs and the overall price level and that sort of thing. So that's how it works. And yes, the legislative members of this group can ask for additional variables to be analyzed by the Brattle Group.
That's helpful. Thank you.
That is clarifying quite a bit, Joyce. Thank you.
And that's why I was saying it's not lockstep. So the scenarios are being developed, it comes out of that process, it's fed over, but it's not the only thing we can look at. Since this group is, we're the ones who have purchased through a contract the assistance of the Brattle Group.
So like to address some of the points of Ken, but before I do that, when I listen to what folks said about why do res reform now, the 3 utility members who spoke up all said res reform should happen, which to me is an incredible thing. I mean, not that many states we have utilities coming to the table saying there's an opportunity here, so that we should just recognize. Like you said, Vermont utilities are unique in some respects. To these states to gather utilities and have them say this is an important thing. So that is, to me, is already off to a great start. Ken's point, just speak for me, but many of the members of the coalition of environmental groups we've been working with, we've recognized that Vermont utilities are doing very good things now. We are trying to build on that to get us to some of the things that some of the people have talked about, greater resiliency, more energy independence, doing our part to fight climate change, things like that. So I don't think I've heard say we need to stop what utilities are doing right now, throw that all out and start over. Let's build on what each utility is doing and try to move forward in a way that meets some of the other goals we've all articulated. That's what we're saying. Catch that, Ken?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes.
And this might be, most of the other people on this group, besides me, were part of the last res bill, so this might not be necessary, but it occurs to me that I'm not sure and maybe we do, but I'm not sure we have a common understanding of the goals of the res. And that might be helpful discussion at some point, if we're going to try to improve it, to at least have a set of goals that it's supposed to achieve. I know what I think it's supposed to achieve, but I don't know if that's, we may have different opinions about the goal of the res. So I'll just put that out there, and you may have already planned that into your discussion at some point. But as we were talking about whether it needs to be reformed or not, I think it's crucial to know what the goal is if you are trying to improve it.
Well, and so let me clarify a little bit. Are you looking for like the legislative legal framework for the res?
No, I'm looking for our collective goal for what the res is to achieve.
And by collective, is that this group, or is that?
We represent a broad, not comprehensive, but broad cross-section of interests of the people who are engaged in this conversation and interested in this area, from ratepayers to, power producers, suppliers, advocates. So I think it might be useful to know what we're trying to have it do if we're going to try to improve how it gets there. Thanks.
Okay, so goals, objectives are the actual job of the standards.
Yeah, what success of the res would look like, and as specific and if it was one simple goal articulated in half a sentence, I think that would be ideal. We probably can't get there, but
there's a piece between what the outcome is and then the utility of the conversation. There's a comment online, it'll take a minute, but what success of the res would look like might be a different answer to a lot of different people, and there's still utility and seeing where those.
It could be. I mean, it could be. For me, the purpose of the res is to reduce Vermonters' carbon production in a global, comprehensive way. That's its goal for me. And that may be fit with some of the other goals, or there may be other folks here in this conversation who have different goals for it. But that's, to me, what it tries to, that's what unites the three tiers across it. That's what unites its goals, as far as I'm concerned, is Vermonters' carbon load. How much carbon Vermonters are putting into the environment, not just in their electrical use, but in other ways, which is why tier 3 comes into it. So that's what my purpose of the res is, but others have other goals they wanted to achieve. And I do think it's important to separate out the goal from what I would call the secondary goals of mitigating the impact. So the res is not the primary goals of the res is not reducing rates, but we all want to accomplish the goal of the res in a way that has minimal impact on rates, because we want people to use electricity and not fossils. But those are those kind of secondary goals that we've talked about and that are outlined well in the legislation are secondary to what we are trying to achieve through the res. And why do we have one? What are we trying to do with it? Anyway, just a thought. Thanks.
It's a complicated thought, and thank you. There's 2 comments online, one for them, and then actually make a pivot back to the agenda. Christopher and then Chase.
Yeah, thanks. I guess a question probably for Joyce or others, but back to the Bretel group, is that what it's called? Somebody mentioned they're outlining several economic scenarios. Can we assume that one of them will be not updating the res or making changes to the res, and what that would look like, particularly as people have mentioned, given the federal dollars that we're not able to draw down with the current res structure?
Is there an answer to that question?
I can address that briefly. So one starting point for the modelers will be the business as usual case known as the BAU or BAU case. And that assumes no changes going forward, right? People continue on the path they're on. So I think that's what you're asking about.
But specifically the interplay with business as usual and the federal incentives that have come online in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a specific question for the modelers.
And for maybe TJ when he comes. Yeah. So I think Chris said the department can answer that when they get here.
Okay, be glad to repeat it.
Chase, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to build upon the point that Louis made a moment ago about a common understanding of the purpose of the renewable energy standard. And I think, you know, at the core of what you said, Louis, I agree with you that the renewable energy standard is in large part about reducing climate warming emissions. I also just wanted to note that if we do go down that route of really contemplating the purpose or the purposes, I guess I should say, of the renewable energy standard, it would be important to at least refer back to the purposes that have already been defined by this legislature. So there already are statutorily enumerated definitions of what the purposes are in 30 VSA 8001, 30 VSA 202A, and also in 30 VSA 8005. So I think those would be, Representative Sebelius, I see, did you have a question?
I do. Well, I have a comment.
Okay. So anyways, I largely agree with what the point you raised, Louis. I also just think that there's been some really important legislative work done on this point to date. That's all.
Yeah, so I actually think there's a difference between goals and purpose. And that this group is charged with making recommendations on potential changes. I think the exercise of goals, we know, we have statutorily defined purpose, but the exercise of goals, I think, would be really helpful for this group in terms of finding that common kind of sweet spot to build off of. So
we'll see how much we can fit in. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot back to agenda, and if that's, do you have, go ahead?
Yeah, just one thing. So it's come up, a couple folks have mentioned, the law. So the policy and law, I mean, is an overarching framework for the whole conversation. So there are the particular tasks that are enumerated in the study group. And so I'm hopeful as we set up our next meeting's agenda that we'll also set a little time aside to say, Louis, to your point, and Chase mentioned it as well, like, where are we starting from? There's already state energy policy, there's already programs, and let's know what's there as we then go on and start talking about what else it might do, because, well, in the end, we'll need to be dealing with the green books to make changes, so we might as well know what's explicitly it's there as we get started. So I think we'll ask council for help at the next meeting. Well, that's a proposal. Let me say it that way. It's a proposal.
Yeah. I'd just say one more thing if I could about that, and then I'll leave it alone. But, I agree with Chase and everything that's been said. I will just go back to, Peter's point that it's been 7-8 years since the res has been written. There was a good law when it was passed. It succeeded in driving electrical sector emissions down very significantly, which is great. Something powerful to build on, but at least 4 members of this working group can change the law if they chose, including, to its fundamentals. So, not saying we should or shouldn't, but.
So Louis, to be clear, you're saying maybe it would be helpful for this group to go around and say, like, what do you see today as the purpose of the res?
Yeah, or what not necessarily now, certainly, but I think it would be useful to have a common set of goals for it in any case at some point.
Yeah.
There is a homework section at the last or second to last item on our agenda. So maybe a homework assignment could be while people are offline to think about that purpose of the res question. Jump starters for next one. Anyway, another proposal. I'm just writing it down.
That's a good one. So I am preparing to take a break, and here's why. We have a break anyway, and it's at that time where you should move your body a bit and breathe back in, full breath, and especially if you're online staring at a screen. At 10 o'clock, we'll be joined by those folks who are going to be preparing some of the modeling and data that you'll have to work with. And so some of those specific questions will probably help you figure out where you're going to place some of these conversations. After we hear from them during the 10 o'clock hour, the second half of it, looking specifically at items 1 through 8, so that you can see where they might fall in the agenda of this 8 series of meetings. That will start this. It's a semi-prioritizing kind of conversation because it at least tells you when the data will be available. It doesn't tell you what you have to do to the agenda, but it will give some natural filtering of what conversations take place when. So that's the territory ahead for the next hour. I'm gonna just check in with you to see right now back at 10. Yeah. I think that means something for social too, because it means the live stream is going to cease, the Zoom meeting stays open. Those of you online can simply just step away from your computer if you like. The live stream is going to end microphone.